The House of Representatives and Senate Explained, Congressional Procedure, a Practical Guide to the Legislative Process in the U.S. Congress. Richard A. Ehrenberg, forward by Alan S. Fruman, thecapital.net. Chapter 4, House Floor. Table of Sections, lettered A through L. Introduction, Scheduling of Legislation, House Rules Committee, Special Rules, Privileged Business, Motion to suspend the rules, Debate, Amendment on the House floor, Voting, Motion to recommit, Final passage, Review questions. A. Introduction. While much of the laborious work on legislation is done during the committee process in the House, it is on the floor of the House where that work bears fruit or fails. Whether or not legislation successfully navigates the House floor depends heavily on the Speaker, the House Majority Leadership, and the Rules Committee. Success or failure is also influenced by policy considerations, political context, and the merits of the bill itself. Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution provides the House the power to write its own rules, including the parliamentary rules under which measures are considered in the House. House rules are adopted by majority vote at the outset of each new Congress, often with slight alterations. In some Congresses, sweeping changes to the rules may occur, especially when the speakership changes parties, such as when Newt Gingrich, Republican of Georgia, became Speaker in 1995. See Chapter 1, Section C. When the Republican Party assumed the House majority for the first time in 40 years. Understanding the differences in legislative procedures between the highly structured House of Representatives, described in this chapter, and the less predictable Senate, Chapter 5, is central to an appreciation of lawmaking on Capitol Hill. It bears emphasizing that the House is a majoritarian body. This means that it is governed by majority vote. Thus, the Speaker, elected by a majority of the House, wields great potential power. This power, as it is applied to legislation, is largely executed through the House Rules Committee. The power of the Speaker depends in part on his or her ability to hold the majority together or forge a new temporary one as a coalition with the minority, which can be difficult for the Speaker, though is a source of great power. In the 113th Congress, Speaker John Boehner, Republican of Ohio, lost reliable control of the House Republican Conference on some major legislation, most notably passage of a continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown. Speaker Boehner was required to work with the minority leader, Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat of California, to get the votes to pass legislation he believed was necessary and critical. In October 2013, the government had been shut down for 16 days when Congress could not agree on appropriations for the new fiscal year. With public disapproval of the shutdown rising, Boehner was able to get compromise legislation through the House to reopen the government. To accomplish this, he needed to work with the Democrats. 87 Republicans supported the bill, while all 198 Democrats in the House voted to end the shutdown. However, Boehner's working with the minority, in this instance and others, exacerbated his already difficult relationship with the conservative segment of his majority party in the House, and he decided to step down as Speaker. Normally, the Speaker, working with the rest of the majority leadership and the committee chairs, retains firm control over the legislative process in the House. Speakers often adhere to the so-called Hastert rule. The Hastert rule holds that the Speaker will only bring a bill to the House floor for a vote if a majority of the majority supports it. Although not a formal rule of either the House or the party conference, this practice associated with former Republican Speaker Denny Hastert, a parliamentarian who served from 1999 to 2007 and was a Republican from Illinois, has been followed by Republican speakers after him. Later speakers, like Boehner, however, have at times been forced to abandon it. Among the most powerful House Speaker was Thomas Brackett Reed, a Republican from Maine, who was elected Speaker in 1889 and who was the architect of an array of parliamentary changes referred to by many historians as the Reed Rules. These changes, coupled with his chairmanship of the Rules Committee, even as he served as Speaker, made him one of the most powerful speakers in the House's history and the first of the modern speakers. Reed was noted for his acerbic wit, or acerbic wit. A member of the House identifying with Senator Henry Clay declared to Reed that he would rather be right than be president. Reed fired back, "The gentleman need not be disturbed. He will never be either." Writer President. The iron-fisted Reed characterized the relationship between the majority and the minority in the House, capturing the spirit that many contemporary observers would recognize. The right of the minority is to draw its salaries, and its function is to make a quorum. On other occasion, he declared, "The best system is to have one party govern and the other party watch." When it comes to controlling the floor in the Senate Majority Leader faces a far greater challenge. See Chapter 6. See also related CRS reports and links on tcncpam.com. Section B. Scheduling of legislation. Measures reported to the House from a committee are placed on a calendar. There are two main calendars on which bills and resolutions reported from committees are placed in the House: the Union calendar and the House calendar. There are a total of 4 calendars in the House, the other two being the private calendar and the discharge calendar. All bills that spend funds or those that raise revenues are placed on the Union calendar. Other reported legislation is placed on the House calendar, with the exception of private bills, which are targeted to affect an individual or group of individuals. For example, some private bills affect an individual's immigration status. Private relief measures are listed on the private calendar. The discharge calendar is reserved for motions to discharge committees. Such motions are placed on the discharge calendar when a discharge petition has received the necessary number of signatures, which is a majority of the total membership of the House, normally 218. See Chapter 3, Section G. The Speaker, Majority Leader, and other members of the majority leadership decide if and when legislation listed on any of the House calendars should receive floor consideration. Such decisions must be consistent with House rules, which affect the priority of certain bills and the particular days when a measure can normally be considered. Even when a measure is listed on one of these calendars, there is no guarantee that it will reach the House floor. House leadership working with the Rules Committee also has control over how a measure is considered. Speakers make certain that the ratio of majority to minority members with seats on the Rules Committee is heavily weighted to the majority, almost always at least a 2-to-1 advantage over the minority. The Speaker also tries to ensure that members appointed to serve on the Rules Committee are loyal to the leadership. The House Rules Committee, Chapter 4C, is sometimes referred to as the Speaker's Committee. Much of the power wielded by modern speakers and the majority leadership grows out of their control of scheduling in the House. A speaker must consider and balance numerous competing factors in making scheduling decisions. Pressures influencing the speaker's decisions include the opinions and desires of the committee chairs, the views of his or her caucus, including factions within that caucus, the administration, particularly if the president is of the same party, outside interest groups, public opinion, and the Senate. Section C, House Rules Committee. In many ways, the Rules Committee is the most powerful committee in the House. It functions as the strong right arm of the Speaker because of its role in the scheduling of major legislation and dictating the process by which legislation is considered in the House. Recent speakers have retained tight control over the Rules Committee. Generally, the ratio of majority to minority members on the Rules Committee is greater than other committees. Since the late 1970s, the ratio has been 2-to-1 plus an additional 1. For members, it is prestigious to sit on the Rules Committee, which exercises considerable power over favorable or unfavorable amendments. When legislation comes to the House floor under regular order, House Rule 17 provides for 1 hour of debate equally divided between the parties. However, to more tightly control proceedings on the floor, the leadership usually prefers the Rules Committee issue a special rule. A special rule takes the form of a simple House resolution, H.RES. Number, that the Rules Committee reports to the House. Such a resolution requires a majority vote for the House for adoption. Such a resolution requires a majority vote of the House for adoption. If the resolution is adopted, it determines what amendments, if any, will be in order and how much debate will be permitted before a vote on passage. When a House committee reports legislation, its chair contacts the leadership seeking a hearing before the Rules Committee and a special rule. The chair of the Rules Committee typically holds a hearing only after the leadership has decided to schedule consideration of a measure on the House floor. The chair, usually in consultation with the leadership, decides when that hearing will be held. Legislation can be held up in the Rules Committee without a hearing for a considerable period, even indefinitely, in order to kill it. For example, during the Civil Rights era in the 1950s and early 1960s, the Rules Committee's chair from 1955 until 1967, Howard Smith, a Democrat of Virginia, known as Judge Smith, was able to hold civil rights legislation that he vehemently opposed in the House Rules Committee, even after Speaker Sam Rayburn, Democrat of Texas, added members loyal to him to the committee seeking to move the legislation. The Rules Committee may also block or delay a bill or resolution because the Speaker does not want his or her caucus to have to take responsibility for a vote on an unpopular measure. The Rules Committee, following instruction by the Speaker, exercises jurisdiction over the order of business in the House. For most major legislation, it is the Rules Committee that determines if and how a measure will be considered on the floor. It will hold a hearing and take member testimony focused exclusively on the bill or resolution proposed as well as potential amendments. Rules Committee hearings are similar to hearings held by other committees. However, other members of the House are generally invited to testify. The chair of the committee reporting the measure under consideration by the Rules Committee testifies before the committee. The author of the bill or resolution may also testify. So may other members seeking to get support for a particular amendment to be made in order under the special rule. When the hearing is concluded, the Rules Committee will decide whether to grant a special rule for consideration of the measure. If they decide to grant a special rule, the committee will mark up the report. If they decide to grant a special rule, the committee will mark up and report the rule, technically a simple House resolution, often written in consultation with the majority leadership, that provides for consideration of the measure taken from the Union calendar or the House calendar. Section D, Special Rules. In order to maintain tight control over the proceedings on the House floor during consideration of major legislation, the Speaker may request that a special rule be created by the House Rules Committee, which provides a structured process for the consideration, debate, and amendment of a specific piece of legislation. A special rule has that title because, for the purposes of the measure under consideration, the special rule supersedes the general rules of the House. The special rule is a privileged matter on the House floor. Privilege means that it is the business Privilege means that it is business that has priority over the regular order of business as defined under House Rule 14. In reality, the House rarely, if ever, follows this order of business. The legislative business of the House is overwhelmingly conducted by unanimous consent or as privileged matters, and most often by suspension of the rules. See Chapter 4F. Special rules frequently dictate how a measure can be debated. Special rules typically provide for a fixed period of general debate on the House floor and may also stipulate if any debate will be in order or on amendments, and if so, how much time will be allotted. Also, the special rule can determine what types of amendments and how many amendments, if any, can be offered to a measure on the floor. They may also waive all potential points of order against the bill. If the special rule permits amendments on the floor without restriction, it is known as an open rule. Under House Rule 16, all amendments must be germane, that is, must relate to the same subject as the bill under consideration. For much of the House's history, open rules were common. As the House has become more polarized on partisan and ideological lines, open rules have become less popular with House leadership. This is because open rules can give rise to time-consuming and unpredictable debate and results. The tighter control of special rules can also prevent the minority from offering amendments that the majority wishes not to consider. If the rule prevents floor amendments entirely, it is known as a closed rule. Some rules, known as modified closed rules or modified open rules, provide a limitation on amendments. The distinction between the two types of modified rules hinges on how restrictive the limitations are on floor amendments and therefore tends to be subjective. A modified open rule may limit amendments to those printed in advance in the Congressional record or place an overall limit on submission and debate of amendments or both. Modified closed rules limit amendments to specific amendments identified in the special rule. Special rules are debated on the House floor under House Rule 17 that limits debate to no more than 1 hour. The time is controlled by the majority. The customary half of the time is yielded to the minority for debate. Section E, Privileged Business. Bills and resolutions that under the House rules can interrupt the regular order of business to be taken up, debated, and voted on are referred to as privileged. Matters privileged in the House include special rules from the Rules Committee, appropriation bills, budget resolutions, and reconciliation bills, conference reports, and reports from the House Ethics Committee. Privileged business also includes legislation listed on certain calendars like the private calendar and the discharge calendar, which are privileged on certain dedicated days. In the case of the private calendar, bills may be considered on the first and third Tuesdays of each month, House Rule 15. However, these bills can be recommitted or sent back to committee if objected to by 2 or more members. Private relief bills typically involve individual immigration and naturalization matters or individual claims against the government. Private bills are placed on the calendar when reported by a committee, most commonly the Judiciary Committee. Private bills are called up in the order that they are reported by the committee and listed on the private calendar. They are considered in the Committee of the Whole, see Chapter 3G, with no general debate, but members may speak for 5 minutes. There may be objections to bills on the private committee because few members have the resources or time to study all private bills. Each party appoints 3 members to a committee of official objectors to review bills. Usually, bills that raise a concern are passed over without prejudice. This permits them to be revised by their sponsors in an effort to meet these concerns. Motions to discharge, see Chapter 3, Section G, may be called up on the House floor as a privileged matter by any member who signed the discharge petition. This may be done only on the second and fourth Monday of each month. Section F, motion to suspend the rules. Most legislation considered by the House is done so by suspending the rules. House Rule 15. These are bills and resolutions that are not controversial and are supported by a large majority of the members. Passage of a measure under suspension of the rules requires at least a 2/3 vote of members voting, a quorum being present. The Speaker may recognize a member to move to suspend the rules and pass a particular measure. This may occur only on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of each week unless by unanimous consent. The motion on occasion will stipulate suspend the rules and pass with an amendment. If so, no separate vote on the specified amendment will occur on the House floor. When the House considers a bill under suspension of the rules, amendments to the measure are not in order. Also, debate is limited, usually to 40 minutes. No point of order can lie against the measure. If a recorded vote, 2/3 required, is not requested, these non-controversial bills can be passed by voice vote. Section G, debate. When the leadership wishes to take up major legislation on the House floor, except for some privileged matter and matters taken up under suspension of the rules, the process generally begins by calling up a special rule that has been reported from the Rules Committee. The special rule determines what the conditions for debate and amendments on the floor will be. Special rules must be approved by the House. See Chapter 4, Part D. They are generally debated on the floor with a 1-hour limit, are adopted by majority vote, and are almost always passed by the House. Special rules are rarely rejected. One exception was the defeat of the rule to take up President Clinton's 1994 crime bill, even though Democrats controlled the House. Even if the Speaker lacks a majority of the votes and is forced to withdraw the special rule, it is a defeat for the Speaker and the majority leadership. If the special rule is adopted, the House usually convenes the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union. The Committee of the Whole, as it is commonly called, is made up of all the members of the House. It is, in effect, the House of Representatives in a different parliamentary form. The House resolves itself into the Committee of the Whole either by the action of a special rule or by unanimous consent. A quorum of 100 members is required to do business in the Committee of the Whole. It is within the Committee of the Whole that the bill or resolution will be debated and amendments, if any, considered. When the House resolves itself into a Committee of the Whole, the Speaker or Speaker pro tempore, the Speaker's designee to preside in his or her absence, steps down and appoints a chair to preside over the Committee of the Whole. The member who presides over the Committee of the Whole is addressed as either Mr. or Madam Chairman or Chairwoman, and not as Mr. or Madam Speaker. This practice of using a committee composed of all of its members to give the House a way to consider controversial and often complex legislation dates from the early days of the House of Representatives. As a symbol of this change from the committee, as a symbol of this change from the House to the Committee of the Whole, the mace is moved. The mace is a 46-inch long staff of ebony and silver that signifies the dignity and authority of the House. Adopted by the first House in 1789, historically it has been used by the House Sergeant of Arms to re-establish order in the House by parading it in front of offending members. Reportedly, it was last used for that purpose during World War I. See the mace. And there is an image here of the mace with a description. The mace is the symbol of authority of the House of Representatives. The following physical description of the mace appears with other information about the mace on the website of the Clerk of the House. The mace is 46 inches high and consists of 13 thin ebony rods representing the original 13 states of the Union. The rods are bound together by 4 crossing ribbons of silver, pinned together and held at the bottom and at the top by silver bands. The bands are decorated with floral borders and a repose design. The name W.M. Adams, manufacturer, New York, 1841, is engraved in the cartouche, located in the front center of the bottom band. This shaft is topped by a silver globe 4.5 inches in diameter and engraved with the 7 continents, the names of the oceans, lines of longitude, and the major lines of latitude. The western hemisphere faces the front. The globe is encircled with a rich rim marked with the degrees of latitude on which is perched an engraved solid silver eagle with a wingspan of 15 inches. The total weight of the mace is 10 pounds. The mace is placed on a pedestal on the rostrum beside the Speaker on his or her right whenever the House of Representatives is meeting. When the House is meeting as the Committee of the Whole, the mace is moved to a lower level pedestal. A viewer watching the chamber on C-SPAN can easily find the mace on the left side of the screen and tell by its height whether it is in the House of Representatives or the Committee of the Whole that is meeting at the time. Section H. Amendment on the House floor. In the Committee of the Whole, as on the floor of the House itself, amendments must be germane. That is, an amendment must be relevant to the bill or amendment to which it is offered, and it must fall within the legislative jurisdiction of the committee that reported it. The House germaneness rule is complicated, and many precedents have arisen from its interpretation and application on the House floor. If a point of order is raised that an amendment is not germane, it is usually necessary for the parliamentarian to provide advice to the Speaker or the chair of the Committee of the Whole on the proper ruling. The parliamentarian's advice is almost always followed. If the special rule, see Chapter 4D, is adopted and does not provide otherwise, legislation is usually open for amendment by section. A section is the basic unit of organization of a bill. Sections may be further broken down into subsections, paragraphs, subparagraphs, clauses, and subclauses. In the most complex bills, sections are organized into titles. If the special rule adopted in an open session, if the special rule is an open rule, any germane amendment that complies with House rules and the Budget Act, see Chapter 7B, may be offered. A special rule that permits amendments but provides for a time limitation on amendments is referred to as a modified open rule. If the Rules Committee provides for the offering of a special amendment or specific list of amendments and prohibits other amendments, the special rule is referred to as a modified closed rule. Under a closed rule, no amendments are in order. Amendments, even if otherwise in order, may be constrained by the absence of room on what is called the amendment tree. The amendment tree is a diagrammatic depiction of the types of amendments and the numbers of amendments permitted to be pending in the House at any given time and parliamentary situation. The Senate has its own amendment trees, see Chapter 5K. The tree also makes clear the order in which various types of amendments can be offered, and if offered, in what order votes would occur. The text of the bill underlies the amendment tree. The amendment to that base bill is called a first-degree amendment. This amendment is subject to being amended by a perfecting amendment, an amendment that simply alters the language but does not completely replace it, or a substitute considered as being in the second degree. A substitute amendment that would replace the entire text of the base bill is also in order and would also be considered a first-degree amendment. The substitute is, in turn, subject to a perfecting second-degree amendment. If offered, 4 such amendments constitute the full amendment tree. If all 4 are pending, they are voted upon in the following order. First, the second-degree amendment to the amendment to the bill text would be voted upon first. Second, the perfecting amendment in the second degree to the substitute amendment would be voted next. Third, the substitute amendment as amended, if amended, would be third. And finally, fourth, the amendment that was offered to the base bill is voted. As amendments depicted as branches on the tree are disposed of, that branch is again open for an amendment of that type. However, an amendment may not amend language that has already been amended. See Basic House Amendment Tree. And there is an image of it here. It shows the text of the bill, and from the center leading out the first degree amendment, from the first degree up, a second degree perfecting amendment to pending amendment, or going down, a first degree substitute to pending amendment, and the second degree perfecting amendment to substitute, which comes off of the first degree substitute to pending amendment from the first degree amendment and the text of the bill. Section I, Voting. House members have smaller personal legislative staffs than do senators. Generally, their personal legislative staffers are less specialized than those on a senator's personal staff. As a result, it can be more difficult for individual House members to prepare for every specific vote on the House floor, and as a result, many House members rely on their party leadership to advise them on their votes. Members of the whip organization for each party are usually stationed near the doors entering the House chamber. They try to make the leadership position clear to members coming to the floor to vote. However, with the improvements in electronic communication, it is now easier for personal staff members to keep their members updated on leadership guidance on votes and other matters. Recorded votes by individual members in the House are displayed on a lighted scoreboard on the wall above the visitors' gallery, clearly visible from the floor. Members are able to quickly check the votes cast by other members of their party in their state delegation, their committee chair, or others whose votes may provide guidance. In this way, if a member is inclined to vote in a certain way but finds unexpected discordance with others they typically vote with, they are prompted to seek clarification before actually casting their vote. There is a tale about the then 12 members of the Massachusetts House delegation in 1975. One member of that delegation, Congresswoman Margaret Heckler, a Republican of Massachusetts, later Secretary of Health and Human Services under President Reagan, became notorious among her colleagues for voting late in roll calls and relying too heavily on the cues from her colleagues' votes. On one occasion, they chose a minor bill and all cast a nay vote for a bill they favored. Heckler came into the chamber, looked up at the electronic vote tally board, and voted nay. Seconds before the time for the roll call ran out, her 11 colleagues instantly switched their votes to yea, leaving her stranded. Presumably, she was more careful after that. There are 4 methods for counting votes on the floor of the House. Votes may be conducted by voice vote, yeas and nays, divisions or standing vote, or record vote. Voice votes, division votes, and recorded votes are also available options for the Committee of the Whole. When voice votes are taken, members shout out yea and nay votes, and the presiding officer judges which position has more votes. Once the voice vote is taken, any member may demand a vote by division. Once the voice vote is taken, any member may demand a vote by division. When the vote is determined by division, first those voting yea are asked to stand and those voting nay are asked to stand. The presiding officer counts and announces the result of the vote. Individual votes are not recorded, just the totals. Both yeas and nays and record votes are taken by electronic device. Members place their voting card into a slot in one of many voting stations on the floor and press a button to indicate a yea or a nay vote or present. If a yeas and nays vote is taken, any member may object on the ground that a quorum is not present. Under those circumstances, the electronic vote will determine both the outcome of the vote and the establishment of a quorum. A record vote is taken when requested if 1/5 of a quorum in the House, 45 members, or 1/4 of a quorum in the Committee of the Whole, 25 members, rise in support of the request. The individual votes of members are displayed on the electronic scoreboard in the House chamber. Normally, the minimum time for a record vote, yeas and nays, or quorum call is 15 minutes in both the House and the Committee of the Whole. However, the Speaker or presiding officer may allow voting to take additional time. The House rules also provide for a reduction to a minimum of 5 minutes at the Speaker's discretion or chairman of the Committee of the Whole when votes occur in sequence. The special rule reported by the Rules Committee may stipulate the way in which amendments are voted on in order to gain parliamentary advantage. For example, a special rule may provide for a way to vote on several alternative amendments to the same language in the bill. An example is the so-called King of the Hill rule. Under this structure, several amendments are permitted, and the rule stipulates a specific order in which the amendments will be considered. Each amendment is voted on. If more than one alternative achieves a majority vote, the last one to be approved becomes the King of the Hill. That is, the bill is amended by that last successful amendment. Such special rules are sometimes referred to as designer rules. An alternative inspired by the King of the Hill procedure is the so-called Queen of the Hill. Under this process, several alternative amendments for the same language are made in order similar to the King of the Hill procedure. Unlike the King of the Hill, however, if more than one amendment receives a majority vote, the surviving amendment is not the last one, but the amendment that received the most votes. The special rule for consideration of a measure on some occasions contains a self-executing rule. Under this procedure, the majority vote on the special rule not only adopts that rule, but the House that very action is deemed to have passed a measure or adopted an amendment to a measure. This is typically used by the leadership to avoid a separate vote on a matter that might be uncomfortable for some in the majority caucus, like an unpopular increase in the debt ceiling. From 1979 until its repeal in 2011, the House actually had a standing rule, former House Rule 28, known as the Gephardt Rule, named after former Democratic leader Richard Gephardt, a Democrat of Missouri, that functioned in the same way. It provided for a self-executing House joint resolution to automatically lift the debt ceiling upon passage by the House of the Congressional Budget Resolution. This served the purpose of protecting members of the House from having to vote to increase the statutory debt limitation, a vote often unpopular with constituents. When the Committee of the Whole has completed its work on a bill, typically the special rule provides that the Committee of the Whole automatically rises and reports that bill with a recommendation back to the House. The Speaker returns to the chair and is handed the gavel by the chair of the Committee of the Whole. Section J. Motion to recommit. The minority party in the House has the right to offer a motion to recommit a matter to the Committee of Jurisdiction. A motion to recommit may be made with instructions. 10 minutes of debate are in order. This motion is generally voted down by the majority once made, but it does give the minority the ability to get a procedural vote framed in the way that they would like in order to force the majority to vote on a proposition on which they may prefer to not be recorded. If no instructions are included, the motion is non-debatable and a successful motion to recommit kills the bill. Section K. Final passage. Once the Committee of the Whole has reported the bill back to the full House, Once the Committee of the Whole has reported the bill back to the full House, the Speaker declares that under the special rule, the previous question is ordered. That is the motion that brings debate on the matter to its final votes. Thereafter, no debate is in order and no amendments not adopted in the Committee of the Whole are in order. Separate votes may occur in the House on the amendments adopted by the Committee of the Whole if demanded by a member, unless prohibited under the special rule. On rare occasions, the House may reject controversial amendments that were adopted in the Committee of the Whole. When all amendments are disposed of, the measure is read for the third time by title after that reading and prior to any vote on passage, the motion to recommit is in order, usually offered by a member of minority. The passage of the measure is determined by majority vote in the House. Section L. Section L. Review questions. What is a private bill and how is it considered on the floor? Why might the minority offer a motion to recommit even if they know it will not be successful? How does a modified open rule differ from a modified closed rule? In the House, what is meant by privileged matters? Compare and contrast a King of the Hill vote and a Queen of the Hill vote. What is the required vote to pass a bill called up from the suspension calendar? Who makes up the Committee of the Whole? What are the methods for counting votes? On the floor of the House, if the presiding officer determines the nays have prevailed on a voice vote, What is the recourse for a member who disagrees? What is an amendment tree? What potential branches exist in the House? What is the significance of the mace? Where is it located?